Hello, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, doing well.
I hope we're gonna have company.
I hope so too. Although it would be lovely to learn just with you.
Yeah.
Um,
How lousy is the weather? Getting any better?
Today was a snow day at our house, but it doesn't take as much snow in Philadelphia to give us a snow day, I think, as it does in Chicago.
Oh, you're in Philadelphia. Okay, I didn't realize.
Oh yeah, my husband works here locally, and we live here, and I commute digitally to New York for school. And we got, I don't know, maybe 6 inches today. Not very much, but enough to keep everyone home.
Where in Philadelphia are you?
We live in Ballackinwood.
Say again?
Ballackinwood, it's like one of the suburbs out right outside of the city.
Which direction?
Oh gosh. No.
North?
West, my husband says,
West?
as I look anxiously in his direction.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the area?
A little bit. My
Oh.
in-laws there, and my daughter went to Penn.
Oh, very nice. I worked at Penn for a year when we first moved here. It's a great school. Good for you.
Yes, she had a terrific experience. Complained about it all the way, but it was terrific.
Did she go to Warden or to just?
Yes, she got a couple of degrees. She went to Wharton. She got a degree in psych, I think, a degree in economics,
Oh, wow.
and not sure what else.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Where does she live now?
She's in New York. Are you familiar with Purchase?
The
North
college?
of, north, pardon?
The college?
No, no, that's where she lives. In
Oh,
Purchase, New York is the name of it.
yeah.
About 45 minutes, 50 minutes north of Manhattan.
Yeah. Very nice.
Not far from the Westchester County Airport.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jerry and Tamar. How are you guys?
Hello, we're good. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Is Philadelphia getting a bunch of snow as well?
Not as much as Chicago. Let me tell you, you guys are winning. But I think we maybe got about 6 inches.
That's a lot.
It's a lot for Philadelphia.
Sure.
We
Are
can
you
send you some if you'd like.
are you expecting more? Is there another storm coming in?
It seems like we're sort of in the eye of the storm. It's supposed to start snowing again, checking my weather, around midnight and snow through the morning. So I'm just hoping there's school tomorrow, but I don't know.
Do they have virtual classes when there's a snow day?
They do, but mine are small. And so like my 2-year-old had a half hour, but it was not very successful. My oldest is in first grade. So for her, there's enough structure, but for the other two, it's hard.
Yeah.
And they miss their friends and running around on the playground and,
Sure.
all of that. So maybe we'll see. If not tomorrow, by Monday. The forecast is looking up. Next week is like all 40s.
That sounds good.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
Hi, Dan. How are you?
Good.
Excellent. Excellent. Hi, Barry. I don't see you, but I know you're there. There we go. Wonderful. All right. Well, we can get started. Let's see if I can. I know that I didn't send my sheet out early enough. I apologize. The long weekend really messed me up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see. Fine, I'll save it. I'm gonna share the link. So if anyone wants to download it, they can. Let's see. I'm gonna put it in the chat if I can figure out how to do that now that I started sharing. Let's see. Here it is. Yes, you have a very well organized Shul, and I gum up the works by sending my sources in late. So I apologize. Wonderful. So I thought that today we would look at part of Terumah, obviously. Terumah is, I saw somewhere that someone said Terumah sort of reads like an IKEA directions booklet. right? It's like very detailed, insert, tab A into slot B, a lot of details about the types of materials that are used. And it can feel like a little uninspired. And yet at the same time, like the Parsha opens with these really strong psukim about, building a house with all of what we come and volunteer willingly, and then creating a Mishkan that Hashem will dwell within us. And so I think that there's a lot there, and it's easy to miss it in all the directions. And I had like flashbacks in 7th grade. We had to draw like an architectural plan of the Mishkan. And I was terrible at that. I'm like not a spatial thinker. And I just like remember sweating at my parents' dining room table, trying to like measure out all the amot. So I decided to go in a different direction. I hope that's that's okay. And I thought we could look at the Aron and look at it as a model for the type of communities that we want to build for ourselves, generally in the world. So, and there are 4 pieces, which I've pretty shamelessly stolen from my teacher and mentor, Rebbe Sarah Hurwitz. I used to work at Yeshivat Maharat, and the first year I worked there, she wrote a Parsha blog each week that she's turning into a book, maybe, or an anthology. And I edited all of them. So she often is a place I turn to for inspiration when I'm looking for ideas. And this is, as I said, the week sort of got away from me with Monday, with my kids being home, and then knowing today was a snow day. So I teach it in her honor and in her name, more importantly. So she lays out 4 pieces, and we'll walk through all the pieces together, hopefully. So thinking about the Aron, which is the first thing that we're instructed to build, the first pasuk that opens is Va'asu Aron atzei shitim, amatayim v'chetzi arko, v'ama v'chetzi rachbo, v'ama v'chetzi komato, right? So this is, again, it's like the measurements of the Aron. And there are 2 pieces of this pasuk that I want us to pull apart. And so I highlighted the second part in purple, which is the part that we'll start with. So the measurements of the Aron seem like a sort of uninspired thing to look at, but the Shnei Luchot Habrit, I think, has a really beautiful comment here on what it means to measure things in half increments, right? And so he talks about how, and I think we'll see this as a common theme throughout all of the sources, that the Mishkan is referred to or alluded to as the Torah, or as us as people, right? I think in some ways, the Mishkan feels very far removed. We'll never go back to the Mishkan the way it was, right? Even if we merit going back to the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan is over. That was like a thing of the desert, of a transition time. And so part of what the Mefarshim are doing are they're trying to pull it into our space, our zone. And so the Shnei Luchot Habrit says, right, that the details of the construction of the Holy Ark, of the Aron, allude to one's preoccupation with Torah, os ek Torah. I think that's a nice way to put it, and those who study it, and how they should conduct themselves. All the measurements given for the Aron are expressed in terms of fractions of cubits. Its length is 2 1/2, its width 1 1/2, and its height 1 1/2 cubits. This is a hint, right? Here he says, this is a hint that those who study Torah should practice modesty, humility, and that they should relate to it with a broken heart. They must not brag about their accomplishments of Torah. So I think this is not the way that I normally think. Like, this isn't the type of Torah that I normally ascribe to, but I think that if we step back and look at it, it really is a beautiful idea that that something about a lack of whole numbers means that we're talking about a lack of whole people, right? No one person is like a full amma or a full, 2 cubits long. We all have our fractions, right? Some of us are less patient. Some of us are, I don't know. That's me. I'm less patient. I'm sure everyone could fill in the blank for themselves, right? But that if we recognize that all of us have those deficits, right, somewhere, that an ideal community is where no one person has their full amot, right? No one's operating with their full deck, maybe, is how the Shnei Luchot Habrit might write it today. And that then we need each other to be complete. And if God had constructed the Aron to be in whole measurements, we might have sort of missed that detail, right? So one piece of community building is realizing we all have deficits and that we can compensate and overcome them together. My husband is journeying out to the grocery store. Hopefully he'll be okay. Drive very slowly. Okay. He says thank you. He's leaving now. So I don't know how that sits with other people. Anyone is welcome to comment or jump in if they want. Okay, everyone must be so blown away by the Torah that they have nothing to say. So the second part of this pasuk that I want us to go back to and revisit is the first part. And the first part is the command, Va'asu Aron atzei shitim, that they shall make an ark of acacia wood. And I brought really just snippets of some of the other introductions to building other pieces of the Mishkan, Va'asita shulchan, Va'asita menorat, right? You shall make me a table, you shall make me a lampstand. And so the distinction being, right, that the Aron is Va'asu, it's in the plural, you all shall make for me. And
Can I ask a question?
yeah. Please,
I'm wondering, the choice of acacia wood, is there any knowledge of why that was considered a particularly choice kind of wood? What was there about acacia that was so special and fine? Does anyone talk about that?
People certainly do. I will admit I skipped over it, but I was reading sort of like a whole someone's blog that I like, and he had all of his like old Parsha classes, and one of them was about the wood. I'll see if I can find it for you. But I didn't read it. It didn't pull my attention. But I think there is some acacia wood is one of the materials that's used throughout the Mishkan. So there must be something special about it. That's a good question. We'll have to do some research. So the Midrash Tanchuma, which is one of the older midrashim on Shmot, or on the Torah Kula, but this one is on Shmot, notices that the Aron is spoken to in the plural, and that the rest of the pieces of the Mishkan, the Shulchan, the Menorah, other pieces, are all in the singular, either commanding Moshe or commanding Betzalel, the ultimate architect. And so it notes, right, Lama, why would it be Va'asu instead of Va'asita? The same way. And so he says, Ela shetzivah HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'asoto l'chol Yisrael, shelo yeheh le'achad mehem pitchon peh al chaver lomar, she'ani natati harbe ba'aron, lefichach ani lomed harbe, va'ani yesh li bo yoter mimcha, va'ata lo natata la'aron klum, ela ma'at, lefichach en lecha chelek b'Torah, right? That if it said that one person would make the Aron, whoever was like the lucky construction worker who got to make the Aron would say, well, I contributed more to the Aron than you, right? I'm more learned. I had a greater piece of the zechut to build the Aron, and you contributed very little. You have no part in the Torah, right? Can almost imagine my 5 and 7-year-olds arguing here. And I think that, right, again, we see sort of that the Mishkan and the Aron are connected somehow to the Torah, right? He starts by by talking about the Aron, and he ends by saying, you won't have any chelek in the Torah, right? Not in the Mishkan, not in the Aron. I think that is sort of this attempt to make it more current in people's minds. And so, right, so I think that what the Midrash Tanchuma is saying here is another important part of Mishkan building and community building sort of at large, is to say that everyone has to have equal opportunities, right? Not everyone, as we know, everyone has their own deficits from above. Not everyone can do the same things to build the Mishkan, but everyone needs an equal shot at being a part of it, so that when it's done and we stand back as a group, as a community, as a people, we can say we all gave important pieces to this task. And I don't mean equal, like, exactly 2 hours from this person and 2 hours from that person, but that everyone is invited to bring and make things and join in. Wonderful.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I cheated while you were talking. I went on Google, and acacia wood is very valuable because its durability is hardness. So it's used by the British Navy for all their constructions. That's straight out from Google. So sorry about it.
Amazing. That's wonderful.
You're talking about the acacia wood. It's
Oh,
used by the British Navy. It's
Oh.
very hard wood.
Oh, okay. Is there any hint with any of this why we should care about all these details? There's just no motivation, just do it this way and then it goes on.
Yeah, it's a great point. And in my learning for this class, I read somewhere that there's like somewhere in the 90s, almost 100 psukim dedicated to each detail of the Mishkan, and something like under 30 for the whole creation of the world in Breshit, right? There's so much detail here and it feels so inconsequential. I mean, I really do think that's why so many of the commentaries try to pull some grander lesson out of the bits and feet and construction pieces, because it feels unimportant in some way, especially if you don't have like a builder's brain or yeah, I mean, I think it was very valuable to the people of that door, of that generation in the Midbar, and this is something that I think we struggle to make feel relevant to us today, definitely.
Yael,
Yeah.
this reminds me that one of our daughters-in-law happens to be artistic. She likes to draw and paint and create things with her hands. And she once said to us, "This is my favorite part." What's your favorite part? All these details. She says, "I love constructing it in my head."
Amazing. I could have
The very
used her
things
instead
that
of
bore us intensely to her are fascinating.
Yes.
Yes, that's beautiful. I think that that's true, right? That this is something that does appeal to many. And it's not really my interest, but I think some of those pictures, like, if you have an art scroll chumash, you can often see pictures of the different pieces, that some people enjoy that. And, and I was remarking to my husband, I spent my gap year in Israel at Midreshet Harova in the Old City. And in the Old City, there is this delightful museum run by really wonderful people who have like a loose tether to the reality. And they have built all of the pieces of the Beit HaMikdash to the measurements that they think are accurate, because they truly believe that like tomorrow morning, the Mikdash could come back down and they will be ready to fill it up with a menorah and all the lavers and pictures and and it's wonderful to talk to them. I remember going as an 18-year-old and thinking like, these people have totally lost it, but there is something truly beautiful about that, right? They really, really believe they're like very holy people. They're very they really believe that the Beit HaMikdash will drop down tomorrow. And so I think that if we could find some of that in ourselves, right, to think like, wow, like maybe we would use all these things, that maybe it would feel more of a connection to this world. But I don't know. I definitely share your struggle, Jerry, and I envy your daughter's connection to these Parshiot. I think it is hard. But so again, right, if I can't really think about building an our own. I mean, I can't think about building anything to be real, but I certainly can't think about building an our own. And so I can think about building a community, right? And I think that is what drives these different commentaries, to say it's not about the measurements on the ruler, it's about thinking about ourselves and how we measure ourselves and our talents and our deficiencies. And not becoming so arrogant in our Torah study or any study, any piece of ourselves, that we think we're a full amma. We'll always, even the best things are measured in half amot. And thinking about how we make it a va'asu moment when we build, physically or metaphorically, anything, right? How do we make it so that the whole community is sort of there and present with us? But I definitely think they're good questions.
I thought of something,
Yeah, please.
tagging along with Tamar, daughters-in-law's impression, that if you see a painting like Hieronymus Bosch or a Rembrandt with so many details, it will be beautiful to look and sit for hours in a museum looking at them. And we cannot make a painting in the Torah. So this is the equivalent to a painting with all those details that we can, like the other lady, sit, imagine, and see with the words what's going on.
Yeah, beautiful. Very nice. So one of the other details that, and this is 3 psukim just on like the very essential piece of the poles. There's more about them. And again, they're made of acacia wood, right? Atzei shitim, and you overlay them with gold, like all of the other pieces. And then the Torah tells us that the poles are going to go in these rings on the side of the walls of the Aron to carry it. And that all makes sense, right? Because they're moving through the desert, and it makes sense that you wouldn't make something totally immobile when you're always moving. But what I think is most interesting is this final pasuk here, that betabaot ha'aron yehiyu habadim lo yasuru mimenu, right? That the poles remain in the rings of the ark forever. You don't remove the poles. This is not something that was ever meant to sit stationary for more than, however long Bnei Israel stayed in one encampment in the desert. And so Professor Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who is a relatively modern Torah scholar and professor, I think he passed away in the 90s in Israel. He wrote a series of Parsha shiurim, and he talks about the Aron, which symbolizes the Torah, right? Again, we see that pull through, is essentially made to be carried from place to place. Therefore, the poles remain fixed to it. The Torah is not bound to any particular place, is the Torah of man wherever he may be. Therefore, the ark is made in such a way as to show by its very nature that it can be carried from place to place. And I thought that was particularly beautiful, both that it does not belong to one place. It's not as though Ashkenazi Jews or Jews from Philadelphia or Jews from Israel can say that the Torah belongs to them alone, right? It's Torah to Adam. It belongs to us wherever we go in the world, wherever we spread out. And also that it is meant to be on the move. Even the word halacha, like for our body of law, comes from the word halach, to move. That Torah has to grow and expand with Bnei Israel, and that Professor Leibowitz saw that was sort of hidden, that charge to keep the Torah moving is hidden in this charge to never take the poles off of the Mishkan. So again, seeing it less as its own physical box that was being carried through the desert, and more as this analogy for how we think about the Torah in our community today.
Nice.
The last component is kind of, I think, a silly one, and I couldn't figure out a way to do this without pulling up this silly article. But there's this big question about how heavy this Mishkan was. And we are not going to read this 3-page article. But this Elihu Schatz is a physicist and also a rabbi from YU. He has his PhD in physical chemistry, and he goes through Rashi, and based on Rashi's map, right, the way that he would have constructed his model Mishkan, he thinks that it was 1,320 pounds. Right, that's not going anywhere, whether you leave the poles in or not. That's like a really big piece of equipment. And so Rabbi Schatz is troubled by that because he wants it to be lighter. He wants it to be movable in the midbar. And so he goes through all these calculations from Josiah Derby, and he calculates that it's 288 pounds. Okay, so we're making great progress, but Rabbi Schatz is not happy with this because he feels like when that weight is distributed over 4 people, it's about 72 pounds per person, and that's too much to walk through the desert like that. And so many important points that we're going to skip over because they are really not interesting to me, to be totally honest. But we could do all this math if we were in a math class or architecture class. But he comes to the conclusion that the Aron was in the end only 183 pounds, which means it's about 46 pounds per person. That is like an acceptable weight for Rabbi Schatz. And so he comes to that conclusion. And what I think is interesting about this is not actually whether whether the aron is 200 something pounds or 100 something pounds or even 1,300 pounds, but that it was big. It was heavy. This is like a serious thing that's moving through the desert, and it's moving on poles carried by 4 men. And I think that everyone's preoccupation with how heavy that really is not, I saw somewhere like a joke about like, imagine if you were called to open the parochet and you had to move 1,300 pounds. Like, it's not something you can wrap your hands around, literally or metaphorically. And I think that is because it becomes like a burden. And so what Rabbi Hurwitz points out, right, is that sometimes the Torah and halacha and practice can feel heavy and like a burden. And she points to this beautiful little snippet from Sota. And I went and I read the whole daf. And it's the story of the Aron and the people coming into Eretz Yisrael, crossing over the Jordan River, with Yehoshua. And the interesting piece there, it's like, right, there's a whole procession and it's very clear how they went, Bnei Israel first or the Aron first, which parts of Bnei Israel went in first by Shevet. But this little line, Nasa Aharon et Nosav, right, that the Aron bore its bearers. That when we really like embrace the Torah, right, this is obviously a physical description, but if we carry it into our metaphor, that if we embrace the Torah and we honor it and we respect it and we love it, that it will carry us. Right, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I think that it fits in nicely with the theme. And so just in case we lost any of them, this is from the end of her 2-page Parsha thoughts, right? The 4 ingredients for creating this beautiful community that we've described that are detailed in the Aron, right? 1 is about the partial measurements. We all have deficiencies. We have to rely on each other. 2 is about all being equally meritorious to receive and participate in Torah, va'asu et ha'aron, not va'asita. 3rd is this idea that the poles, right, indicate that the Torah is not meant to be stagnant. It's meant to move with us wherever we go in the world, through the desert to Israel, and then, throughout the diaspora. And that 4, that when we do all those things well, then the burden of the Torah is really not a burden at all. And whether it's 100 pounds or 200 or 1,300, that the Torah will sort of lift and carry us up into the world. And so for me, what was so inspiring about this and what inspired me to bring it for you is this idea that unless you have sort of that artistic brain that Jerry and Tamar's daughter has, which is amazing, that sometimes this can feel very dry, but I think that this was a really nice way to pull it into feeling like it was something we could embrace. We can't make the Aron, but we can strive to follow the values on which the Aron was built to make our own communities a place where God would dwell, right? Because when God comes down, when the Shekhinah comes down, it doesn't say V'shachanti betocho, that God dwelled in the Mishkan. It says V'shachanti betocham, right? It dwelled in the community that built the Mishkan, and within all of them. And so I hope we all merit to have the Shekhinah dwell in our own selves, our own homes, if it can make it outside into the snow, in our own bigger community. And
This last piece, step number 3, seems to be the critical one. If you start from the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, their sacrifices were always around some stone, some other fixed object, regular object. And you get to Moshe, that's left behind permanently. Never happens again. Now what they have is something they carry with them, and it's their guide. It's their beacon, not beacon. It's a guide of a sort. So I would say number 3 is really, she's getting to something very fundamental about the Mishkan.
yeah.
And of course, once you get to David, you're back to the stones again.
You took the words right from my mouth. I was going to say, you're right. It's such a beautiful evolution. And then isn't it so interesting that we create this central, very fixed place? And obviously we should hope and daven for our new Beit HaMikdash, but I think there's something to this idea that we moved back out, right? We fanned back out into maybe fixed spots, but many of them all over the world in all different with all different kinds of like feelings and pieces to them, and Torah being taught in them. And that is beautiful in a lot of ways. I know that many people are thinking about what it means to be a post-COVID shul, right? And are we going to be a brick and mortar or a stone, right? Matseva type shul, or do we find a way to sort of lift ourselves into the world of Zoom for the better and not for the worse, and to create more community that moves with the people? If there is a silver lining to pull out of this whole mess, you know. But yeah, I think it's a beautiful idea that the Mishkan is in some ways even more of the ideal for us than the Beit HaMikdash, just in terms of like meeting people where they are.
The Beit HaMikdash is, of course, has its importance, but in our history, it's the Sifrei Torah that go everywhere that centered, not the Beit HaMikdash.
Nice.
In fact, when you read of the actual ceremonies at Beit HaMikdash, not everyone finds them pleasing.
Yes, we'll have to cross that struggle when we can get to it in Vayikra, but I am steeling myself for it. Yes, I agree. It is hard to imagine. When I lived in Israel later in life with my husband, we went to the Pesach Sheni. The Samaritans do this elaborate ceremony that is very similar to Pesach, and it's very cool to witness. And so we went to this small town. I mean, the Samaritans are declining rapidly as a community, but they do this thing where they have a high priest, and he chants a piece of Shmot, like while he walks into this arena, and they have all their goats there and their lambs, and it really, I mean, you can imagine that might have been what it had felt like on Pesach. It's really amazing. But let me tell you, the smell and the sights and the sounds are really not what our modern minds think of when we think about, you know, Avodat Hashem. And it was like a little disturbing to me. Like it's like you're in a slaughterhouse at the end. And I cannot imagine feeling like that is a holy place again. But you know, I think
Didn't the Rambam
Oh, yeah.
say that sacrifice was the stage that we had to go through, and when we were fully mature, we could leave that behind?
yeah, right. The Rambam feels like tefillah was not an accommodation post Mikdash, but it was actually the goal all along. But that Bnei Israel weren't really ready for a way to express their worship of God in such a in their minds and not in their body way, because, you know, everyone else worshiped their gods in such a sacrifice-based model. And so that was like a tool, definitely, in his Mar Nevuchim. That's where he talks about it. Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that in our third Beit HaMikdash, there'll be a women's tefillah room and a traditional davening and maybe a yoga space, and right, there'll be lots of ways to serve God in the ways that we have evolved to serve him. But I don't know, obviously. Wouldn't it be amazing to know? Right, what will the vegetarians do? My sister is a avid vegetarian. She will not eat any Pesach offering, let me tell you. We'll have to feel it out. We should be so lucky to merit that. What, Dan? Oh, we can't hear you. Are you muted? Oh no, we see your mouth moving. I'm sure it was very, very smart. I wonder if I mute you and then unmute you, if it'll work. Maybe try unmuting and try again. No, I'm sorry.
What's the problem?
They can't, they're unmuted, but we don't hear them.
Oh,
Do you hear them?
No. we don't
Oh,
hear
okay. I thought maybe it was just my computer. Didn't like Dan and Debbie. This is the trouble with the you know, traveling mikdash. In the room, no one would ever have to struggle to hear anyone else.
maybe they could use the chat. to say what they wanted to say.
Oh, you could chat it to us if you'd like. There's no pressure. You don't have to. But I do think, right, we're heading into that period of Torah that in some ways feels less relatable because it's all about the Mishkan and then the sacrifices and the priests, right? Like a caste system. My daughter was dismayed to learn that she's just a normal Bat Yisrael. There's nothing special about her. Oh, you have not met my sister, Dan. I don't know. God might change God's mind. She's very, very fiery woman. But yes, who knows? Who knows? Maybe, you know, it's so hard to imagine a world like that. And I really do, you know, when you live in the old city, you meet a lot of people who are really convinced the Beit HaMikdash will fall from the sky tomorrow. And there's something very inspiring about it to imagine that life could just change so suddenly in such a, hopefully for the better way, but who knows? Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to see. Well, so next week we will not be together because it is Purim. So we will skip Titzaveh, but we'll come back again and battle with the Mishkan. Don't worry, there's one more Parsha after that of Mishkan-filled detail and activity. So we'll have to see where we go. And then, of course, we will head into the book of Vayikra. My bat mitzvah Parsha was Vayikra. So hopefully I'll have something interesting to say for at least one Parsha, if not more. Wonderful. I hope everyone has a wonderful Purim. I was talking to Rav Ari. It sounds like, you know, Purim is hard this year, but I hope everyone can find some happiness wherever it is over the day, and that you all dress up or find some levity somewhere. My family will be the Incredibles. So dressing up is very important to 5, 7, and 2-year-olds. And then I'll see you on the other side of Purim a week later.
Purim
Okay.
Sameach.
Purim Sameach.
Purim
Yeah.
Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat.
Bye-bye.